part of the solution. In the occult world, the belief was that whoever opened the portal had to be the one to close the portal. And that's just the belief in that camp. And so, as you already said in the opening introduction, that Jack Parsons blew himself up in his lab before the portal got to be closed. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but this group that the government set up to investigate all of this, they start to realize that this was done via communication with entities. And so they began to try to communicate with entities, just like Jack Parsons, not in the Babylon working. You know, we don't have information on how they started, but what we find out is that later on, the Collins elite rose up. This small counterpoint group, they spark and they say, you know what? This goes against our worldview. This goes against our Christian worldview. And back in the 40s, I mean, goodness, there was a time when Christianity was very prominent in America, when we had morals and when people were more conservative in what they believed. And so this was one of those times where this group says this is going against our Christian faith. They reported that this group was now partaking in satanic rituals in order to communicate with entities. The same group that started off trying to get answers, they began to go deeper and deeper, and they realized that power could be attained and that information and technology could be given through all of this. Now, I think it's important that we go ahead and talk about FBI document 6751. Let me say that one more time. Declassified document 6751. Anyone who's watching this video, they can go download this from the FBI vault. This is not some conspiracy theory.
Say it one more time, the
FBI document 6751. This is a document that was submitted by a very prominent member of academia. They submitted this document to the FBI, and it outlined that they've known for some time now that we're not dealing with space aliens.
Before you go on, I just tried to pull it up, and I got denied. Access denied by the vault.fbi.gov.
Are you kidding me?
Try a different link here, yeah.
Wow, because like we downloaded it from the vault in our initial research. We've got hard copies of it now, and we've been talking about it. We've been going around and talking about it. We talked about it on the SGT report.
Lay down,
100,000 or more people have already probably gone and looked it up. So it's possible that
it's able to pull it up anonymously. So maybe I'm not allowed to see it as who I am. Anyway, go on. I'm just gonna scroll through here and look at the documents while you talk.
Okay, so document 6751, it was submitted to the FBI, and this prominent member of academia, he had scholarship behind him, and he was communicating that there was open knowledge now that we're not dealing with space aliens, but we're actually dealing with these entities that were crossing through dimensions. They were coming from what was called the ethereal plane. Now, that's interesting for us, Gons, because we have talked about astral projection, we've talked about New Age practices, and people will come back from the ethereal plane, they'll take an ayahuasca trip or DMT or something, and they'll come back from this ethereal plane, and they'll talk about the ascended masters were there. Sometimes they have horror stories of what they experienced in this ethereal world. But this language was being used back in the 40s. And the original FBI agent that received this document, he tried to say that this information was received by supernormal means, that it was occultic basically, and that nothing to see here kind of situation. We're just gonna try to debunk this document. That was what because he put a little bit of an introduction as he forwarded it. But here's what's crazy: if the document wasn't real, like if this was not a real threat, or if this wasn't real information that the government felt was valuable, why would he forward it to all of these people and then classify it? Why do you classify a document if you don't think there's validity to it?
Yeah.
So clearly the FBI was onto something here. The federal government, because based on this document dating back to the 40s, which it's declassified now, we can all go look into it, but they used language in this document, like the locus and the talus. These are words that go back to theosophy. Okay, right. This is a declassified federal FBI document. They classified it for a reason. They believed what it said, and it said that these are not space aliens, but they're interdimensional beings. Wow. That's groundbreaking. That nobody's talking about this. Why is no one talking about this? And so I got to just give credit real quick. Chad Riley's the one who fished this document out. I mean, this is one of those documents, if you don't know what you're looking for, you're never going to find it. But Chad Riley being the great, I mean, what a blessing it is to have a Chad Riley on our team, because he finds these things. And so we've downloaded, over 300 FBI documents that were now declassified, all pertaining to, psychic abilities, ESP, aliens and UFOs, things that the government has been working with knowledgeably since the 40s, knowing that it wasn't actually space aliens. So I think that's kind of important to note, that the federal government, at least factions in the federal government, they knew that they were dealing with spiritual higher entities. And they knew this back in the 40s. And so when they began to make contact with them, this non-existent group that the Collins elite sparked out of, the bigger group began to do whatever they could in their power to try to communicate with these things, pretty much doing similar rituals, if I understand correctly, that Jack Parsons would have been doing to make contact. So Parsons blows himself up in his lab. It's an accidental explosion. He dies, and nobody's there to close what they believe to be an open doorway. So they now are, going forward with this mentality that there is an opening, a rift in the space-time continuum. Now, it sounds like science fiction, but these are seasoned federal researchers, agents of the highest security clearance, and they're now trying to make contact. And then the Collins elite apparently validated that they did make contact, and it's not a good thing. So the Collins elite tries to come up with a solution. What are we going to do about this? We have a Christian worldview. And look, you can have a Christian worldview without being a Christian. Let me just make that really clear.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who will always call themselves a Christian. They're a back row, Sunday only Christian. They go to church, and they basically have a moralistic standard of things, but they don't really walk with Jesus. They've never been born again, but they still have a Christian moralistic worldview. It's kind of like the same type of worldview that would say, let's put the Ten Commandments, like the Founding Fathers, for instance. We have evidence that the Founding Fathers were not born-again Christians like David Barton has told us in all of his films, but that they were involved in occultism, at least a good portion of them. But they still respected the Ten Commandments, and they still put the Ten Commandments, all over the place. And so there's kind of a fine line there. You can have a Christian worldview without actually walking in the truth of Scripture. But we believe that the Collins elite had some very strange theology. They believed that they could bring about a theocracy, a forced theocracy in America, where they put us back under the law of Moses in order to combat the coming invasion of these demonic entities that were now in cahoots with federal government.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That was one of the things that when I first heard about the Collins elite, which was a long time ago, in one of the early interviews I think Derek Gilbert did, the thing that stood out to me was, oh, these guys want to create a Christian theocracy? That sounds kind of messed up. So my whole perspective was like, oh, that doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound good at all. But in context to what they were dealing with in front of them, it's kind of like, I can understand why they would want to push that, at least at a public level, try to get people on board with something like that, because you can't explain to people like, hey, these demons are coming through this hole, and we better make the full armor of God law, because it's going to be hitting all of us, So I could understand.
They were scared.
Yeah, I would imagine.
You have to understand. Think about it like this: if you could take yourself back to Leave It to Beaver and Andy Griffith, okay? Like this is important. Like everyone watching this video needs to think like this. Go back and watch a couple episodes of Leave It to Beaver or Andy Griffith show, where everything is perfect. Everyone goes to church. It's a clean community. We don't have all of the satanic afflictions that we have today. Like, our society now is so dirty compared to what it was back then.
Yeah.
And so back then, if you're working in what you believe to be a Christian government, that was the mindset back then. Back in the 40s and 50s, they believed that this was a Christian nation. That was what they believed. And so you're in the government, in the Andy Griffith days, everything's good, you never have to use your gun, that kind of scenario, right? And then all of a sudden, like, this group is having to research paranormal activity, and the government already had foreknowledge that these were not aliens, but it was kept on lock and key because it was an FBI document that they didn't want to share with everybody. This goes to show that there are factions in the government that don't always see eye to eye.
Right.
And all of a sudden they see their coworkers, their colleagues are now involving themselves with extrasensory perception, occultic practices, making contact with these interdimensional beings. And this is taking place in the 40s and going on into the 50s and possibly into the 60s from the same group Matter of fact, we were told by a source that the last remaining member of the Collins Elite just died, like within the last 10 years. Now, I can't prove this. It might have been last year, but I don't know. I hate talking about speculation because none of that can be proved. But the thing is that there were people that got scared and they branched off, and that's what we call the Collins Elite. It has nothing to do with the Collins Elite family, like the Elite family bloodline of, no connection there. But what we do know is that they said that this is dangerous. We don't need to be doing this. Kind of like the warning that Stephen Hawking gave to CERN, It's like, if Stephen Hawking is warning you to stop, something must be really bad because the guy was an atheist, But anyway...
when you can scare an atheist about God, you don't want to...
Exactly. It's kind of like in Home Alone. It's like, well, look, if Uncle Frank says you shouldn't watch Angels with Filthy Souls, it's probably really bad.
Old school references.
It is. But I found myself really just mind blown by the evidence of old federal documents. Like a lot of these alien UFO documents, they go back. Like they're not new. They're old and they've been classified for so long, and they've finally been opened up to public record. And so we began to study the documents, reading through pages and pages of declassified documents, which many of them have blacked out sections. You know how they do. They'll declassify it, but they're going to cover up some of it. And so we began to really dig into this, Gons, and we realized that this is a major conspiracy that started off with good intentions. It started off to try to get answers to what was happening, and then they began to want to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and people began to get engulfed in this form of real spirituality that they're experiencing themselves. They're now communicating with entities, and things began to get, a little uncomfortable for some of the men in the group who were of a Christian worldview.
Right.
So that is the Collins Elite. So the question is, can we validate that this really happened? So we wanted to talk to other people and get some information about other scenarios that are possibly still going on today. We wanted to really dig and try to confirm this by other activities. And so with that, we talked to Stan Deo, and is it okay if we go ahead and jump into Stan? Are we okay with that?
Yeah, go for it, yeah. I'm actually going to find a spot here with Stan and go for it, yeah.
So Stan Deo, a lot of people, are probably not ready to hear what he has to say. He says some things that are kind of out there sounding. Like if you're just like a regular everyday Joe and you hear an interview with Stan Deo, you're probably going to think, wow, he's probably a little crazy. But Tom Horn talked to me about Stan Deo, and Tom Horn is pretty conservative, and he told me that before his house burned down, that he had a newspaper from Britain, somewhere in the UK, but Tom Horn had this big front page newspaper ad, and it was a picture of Stan Deo with like these other very elite scientists from the UK and I believe even from Australia. I forget how many people were connected here, but you had Stan Deo standing with these elite scientist guys, and the headline was teaching that these men are working on anti-gravity technology.
Right. They actually had a headline, a whole front cover thing. Wow.
Yeah, and it was like, and so Tom was just wanting me to know that even though Stan might say some things that seem a little out there, that he was really there, really working on these projects that were non-existent, but it was all under the guise of anti-gravity craft. Like the public was told that these guys are working on some heavy-duty stuff, and this was advertised in the UK. And so he's kind of a hero over there. So anyway, what happened was Stan Deo ends up getting...
he gets trapped in Australia. He gets extradited into Australia.
Yeah, well, so he's working as a secret agent for the FBI. He got recruited. That's the word I was looking for. So he gets recruited by the FBI, and tells his full story in our film. Like he explains how it all went down. And he goes over to Australia to work inside of a DUM, a deep underground military base. Mm-hmm. And he's working underneath the surface of the earth with Australian and British intelligence. Now, this is important, Gons, because in our last discussion that we had on the Hollow Earth, we talked about this thing called Operation High Jump, which was a joint task force of America. It was led by it was America, Britain, and Australia all working together to go down to Antarctica, where there was alleged UFO battles and craziness that took place. The mission that they went down there to do got halted really quick. And so, if people haven't, heard the video we did, I think it's had over 1 million plays now.
Yeah.
But go back and check out the demonic army is beneath our feet. I forget. Maybe you can put a link in the description here.
I'll have it in the cards.
we broke down Operation High Jump pretty in depth in that discussion, so I don't want to waste time. But it's important to note that the three groups, the three governmental agencies, you had groups from America, you had groups from Britain and Australia working on these secret, non-existent UFO missions. Well, now they're down in Australia working on, reverse engineering craft and working on anti-gravity technology. Stan talks about technology that allows a human being to walk through a wall.
Right.
Stuff that, and he explained this as low-level toys.
People like him have been looking at that stuff for so long that it's, the capabilities of that technology go far beyond maybe just even walking through walls, which sounds ridiculous to us. But it's even biblical too, in the sense of it's Jesus getting through stuff and appearing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, the thing that blows my mind about Stan Deyo is that he doesn't miss a lick.
Yeah.
The guy is, if you look at him, and this is one of the cool things about this film, is we did it as a live action. You're literally coming with us on the road everywhere we go. You're like a fly on the wall. This isn't a studio documentary. This is a live action. Like you said before we started, it was almost like a mix of reality TV and a movie. It's like both. And so we go around and you can see in everybody's face, we joke around a lot, Gons. I praise God for the joy that I have in Jesus, that I can laugh and cut up. But this film, there's nothing joking about this movie. This is some serious business. You are looking into the eyes of personal stories that people are going to take with them to their grave. They will always have these memories. And when you look at Stan Deyo's face when he's telling his testimonies of all this stuff, this isn't. He's still carrying this weight on his shoulders.
Yeah.
He was exposed to some things. He said that his colleagues that were right above him were working directly with entities, and he explained different types of entities in the film. He was explaining different classifications of entities that he was aware that they were working with in Australia.
Yeah.
But the thing that really caught my attention about Stan is that when he says that there was a battle, there was something that happened down there where agreement got breached, and he said he was told immediately to pack it up and leave. And he's in another country, and look, our government, our CIA, and our FBI, they've been known to just abandon agents on the field and never to talk to them again. They pretty much die. They don't give them any money or help to get back home. It's like when a secret operation goes south, they abandon you, generally speaking. And so what's interesting about that is that Stan made it back, but he was told, this is done. He gave a disclosure that they had him give a closing statement, which was supposed to be played in the congressional hearing, which never happened. He was very upset about that. His testimony of what happened and how he was treated in the closeout, he said it was not done properly, and then he gave his full disclosure statement. He says it never got played for the congressional hearing that was supposed to take place. It was so hush-hush and covered up, but he says that there were, what he talked about was very similar to some of the stuff that Phil Schneider talked about. But the difference is that we know Stan Deyo. We have, he is a well-respected scientist. He showed us documents at his house, Gons, of all the diagrams and the scientific reverse engineering, the stuff that they were working on. He has all this in folders. And so he pulled it all out, he showed it to us, but he told us that he was aware that while he was in the program, he was aware that the federal government, prior to him, had made a deal with entities. And he was pretty sure that the deal that they kept referring to was the Eisenhower deal. Now, what's interesting about the Eisenhower deal is because you have two events that often get kind of blurred. Matter of fact, I've made error in the past, and so I'm just going to set the record straight here. In 1954, I believe it was, you had the Edwards Air Force Base incident. And then in 1955, a year later, you had the Holloman Air Force Base incident. Now, the Edwards, that was where Eisenhower disappeared. And he's nowhere to be seen. It was kind of like when Obama and Hillary disappeared. Remember the media blackout?
Yeah.
The Bilderberg thing?
Bilderberg.
Well, something similar happened to Eisenhower at the Edwards Air Force Base, and it's kind of lock and key. It's kind of like hush-hush because it's like, well, they never admitted that he was meeting with entities. The official story was that he had an emergency, and he had to go to a private dentist, at an odd time. The story was very weird. So he goes to get some dental work done in an emergency, dental situation, and he's blacked out. Like, nobody knows where he was other than he just got dental work done. But the story was that he was meeting, talking about a possible treaty with entities. And a year later, you have the Holloman Air Force Base incident, which we break that down in depth in the film on various levels. where you have this event that takes place on the landing strip where UFOs come down, and there's a bunch.
You got cut up a little bit there. You said there was a bunch of, was it crafts? Sorry.
Yeah, there's a bunch of, no, there was a bunch of witnesses.
Okay.
Yeah, you want me to take that back a little bit?
Yeah. It just froze when you said a bunch. It was kind of funny. Yeah. Your face froze at bunch. Anyway, go on.
So the difference is that you had the Edwards Air Force incident, the Air Force Base incident, where there was no evidence other than hearsay, like because they covered it up and said he was getting dental work. But then a year later, the Holloman Air Force Base, you had witnesses now. You had people who didn't really know what was going on, but they were there and they witnessed craft coming down and then leaving. So people have come forward. There was some video disclosure that came out in the 90s, old school videotape stuff, where people that were there that day, they've given testimony on record that Eisenhower was there and that he met with some type of creatures that were coming down in these crafts.
And then I find out that there's 8 seconds of the Holloman Air Force Base film in the film. So Bob's my friend. I'm going, Bob, there's 8 seconds of film in there. And he goes, well, yeah. And I said, he told me to pull the film. And then he said the key words. He said, but it didn't show anything. What it is you see the hills of Holloman, and you
Winning.
see this object, this brilliantly lit object that's coming over the hills, but it's in a distance. So you don't see it close up, and you don't see the alien when the alien gets out. That's the classified part. So they want you to know that Holloman happened, and they allowed them to use the 8 seconds of the film, but the rest of the film, the classified part, was pulled.
Check with Edwards. Make contact with him, Bill. This is Holloman Air Force Base Control Tower. Identify yourself. What's your tail number? First approaching on military airspace. Along with 2 base Air Force scientists arrive and wait apprehensively. A panel slides open on the side of the craft. Stepping forward, 1, then 2, and a 3rd. Men dressed in tight-fitting jumpsuits. Perhaps short by our standards, with an odd blue-gray complexion, eyes set far apart, a large pronounced nose. They wear a headpiece that resembles a rope-like design. The commander and the 2 scientists step forward to greet the visitors. Arrangements are made by some sort of communication, and the group quickly retires to the inner office in the King 1 area.
Now, interestingly, his granddaughter is a major proponent in the New Age alien, movement, and she's traveling around telling family stories and secrets that Eisenhower really was in bed with the entities, and that he met with them, and that there was a treaty. So then we have Darren Geisinger that enters into the picture,
Bitch ass nigga.
and he's explaining that he heard a different spin on the story, and he explains that there was this idea that you had the gray aliens and then you had these like tall white Nordics, and that they were presenting a narrative to the federal government that they were on different teams.
Right.
And the Nordics were warning the government, don't sign a treaty with the gray aliens. And the Greys were offering such and such a thing, the Nordics were offering such and such a thing. But the bottom line was they were presenting this false narrative that they're not on the same team and that the Greys can't be trusted, but the Nordics are the saviors. This is some interesting information, because if that's true, that goes back to the idea of the long game we're talking about, where they're going ahead and setting up the scene for the Great Deception to where there's good aliens and there's bad aliens.
Right.
And the good aliens are going to save us. That's pretty much, and that goes back to the Holloman Air Force Base incident.
Yeah, you bring up so many things there that, I'd love to dig into more of it, but in terms of the Eisenhower meeting and the Greys and the Nordics, I think Stan Dale was the one that talked. We talked to Stan, I believe it was like 2012 or 2013 for Canary Cry Radio, and he told us a bunch of his stories. Not everything, but I think you get a little bit more out of him, face to face in the documentary. But he told us about walking into rooms where there were rituals. Looked like rituals were being performed, but also that he heard from a guard. I don't think it was him directly, but he had heard from a guard that he had seen one of the entities, and that their skin looked kind of flaky. It was kind of like a rainbowy, flaky, almost like I think
oil slick.
Oil slick, or I imagine like the wings of a bumblebee or something. If you get it just right in the sunlight, it kind of has that glowy feel to it. But that's really interesting too, because it ties into this greater narrative of, you know, the crazy conspiracy theories of reptilians and all this stuff. It kind of, you know, we don't have to necessarily go all the way there, but you can start to see how that kind of lore or mythology is created, like a modern mythology of reptilians, you know, running the governments of the world. That kind of narrative, you can see how it can form with this kind of experience of people having these types of experiences. So
now, I laugh a little bit when you say reptilian. I laugh a little bit, not because I don't believe there's truth to it. I laugh a little bit because of how far spun out of reality it gets.
Yeah.
You know, it's like people will say every little glitch on a YouTube video is the reptilian showing through, and I'm like, okay, guys, come on. You know, I mean, let's be real here. Biblically speaking, Satan is that old serpent, that old dragon. I don't believe that that's metaphor. I believe that those words are actually linked into the type of angel that he is. And you know, as we broke down in the Hollow Earth Chronicles, we broke down how, you know, a first-generation Nephilim, according to myth, if you want to call it myth. I do that just to protect myself, because many people are going to say, well, that's mythology. But it's, you know, different cultures of the world have written about these serpentine qualities.
Bro, I gave you the chance to not do it, and you did it.
You're dealing with these, you know, if it was the seraph that fathered the Nephilim, which many records that we've looked into have said that, then they would have had a reptilian quality. And you know, even back in the day when we were doing L.A. Marzulli stuff, on the Fourth Watch, we were talking about, you know, the detachable jaws and some of the giant elongated skulls, which is very
serpentine,
reminiscent of, you know, certain snakes. But anyway, without going too much of a tangent, what you said was right on point when you got that oil slick. I used to work in a pet store when I was in high school, and I loved working in the reptile section because we had some pretty exotic snakes, you know, like some different boa constrictors, pythons, and different things. And that's very much the case. A lot of the snakes, when the light hits their skin, when their skin is fresh.
Nah, chill, bro.
It has a little bit of an
man, you motherfuckers are retarded.
They get down in the water and come out of the water, the way that it looks, it's got that oil slick look. So it is interesting that he said that, and he said that that was given to him directly by somebody who was a superior, if I understand correctly, and somebody who he trusted. But the other side of that, I asked him a direct question. I said, tell me about, you know, have you had any personal encounters with what you believe to be an entity, you know, manifested in you know, in an earthly form, basically, while you were in the program? And he says that he was at a United Nations meeting. You know, interesting, because I've heard some crazy stories about United Nations meetings with Carl Teichert. He's told me some crazy stories. So it's like anything goes at these meetings. And so he's at this meeting, and he said that he ran into a man and a woman, who he felt in his heart, you know, his discernment was telling him that they were not from around here. You know, they were not earthborn. And so he said that when he was in the room with them, he felt like it was just a strong oppression. He said he felt like he was like a canary in a cage. I'm not saying that to joke around with, you know, Canary Cry Radio. He literally said that in the film. He said that he felt like he was a canary in the cage and like they were the cat. He felt like they were predators and he was the prey, that they could see Christ in him and that they were demonic. And so he couldn't validate whether or not they were humans, that maybe they were just possessed or they were involved in something or other. But regardless, he felt the oppression being around them, and he believes that they were not human beings. So he shared some of that in the film. He shared some very, very interesting stories. And I think that the benefit of watching the movie is that you get to see the reality and the emotion from the people who witness these things. You know, you get to see how real this is. But that kind of, you know, let's move into Tom Horn if we can. I want to try to go through it, just, you know, I want to lay out some of these highlights here, because the film covers a whole lot of stories. So Tom Horn, he's been holding on to some personal family stories for years, and he had told his sister that he was not going to talk about it publicly. I mean, he made a big deal about this. He was like, look, I won't disclose this, you know, until you're, you know, gone, or I don't remember all the details, but he ended up talking about it with us back in 2010. And he told my brother Wes and myself, he told us these stories, some of them at least, off camera. It was just, you know, we were just hanging out with Tom, and we got done filming, and he starts to tell us these family stories, and I'm just like, whoa, like your family experienced this stuff? I mean, it's so crazy that Steven Spielberg has even reached out to his sister, because her stories have made it that high up, that Spielberg wanted to talk to her, and she got to see, like, Steven Spielberg apparently has collected alien artifacts because he's got so much money. He's been able to buy these high dollar auction items that are, you know, called alien artifacts. Matter of fact, they said that he had a tent. This is not in the film. This is just a little extra nugget that he had like a tent set up at one of these locations he was working on, and the tent was loaded down with alien gear. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. That's crazy.
It sounds like a good business to get into, you know? Yeah, this is an alien shirt. The aliens wore this
exactly.
shirt.
You know, come on over here, and I'll show you my whole tent of alien merch. But no, like apparently he's not just remotely obsessed. He's extremely over the top obsessed with all things alien and UFO, and he's got the elite status quo where he can get into places, and you know, he's Steven Spielberg. I mean, come on, you know, he's a hero in the film world to anybody who is a filmmaker, probably. Anyway, all that said, Tom is finally breaking out these family stories on camera for the first time. And he's telling us all this stuff, and we had to, you know, we just kind of had to go and shoot wherever he wanted. We didn't have, you know, that's one thing about this project is the sensitivity of the information that's in this film. It's not a matter of, I mean, like, we literally just had to run and gun this film. Like, wherever these people would meet with us, and you know, they didn't want to come out to a studio. It was a matter of we just got to go and get what we can get, because we're trying to get personal stories, and there have already been many deaths linked to people exposing this information.
Right.
That's the thing that Tom warned us. So anyway, Tom's sister, I'm not going to get into all the details, but he tells stories about her, you know, what we would call somewhat abduction, like experiences as a child in their house where these little entities were showing up, and she was paralyzed. She never got taken out of the house, as far as I know. But the reason I'm not telling all the stories is because we got to get through this. We got a lot to talk about. But his sister had alien encounters when she got to the age of puberty. That's kind of interesting because her daughter came up and had the same thing happen at the same age. Generationally, these entities were now attacking her daughter, and she married a guy. This is where the story gets fascinating.
Yeah. This is the part that I actually didn't know about until the film. So go ahead.
Yeah, and she didn't want this shared. I'm surprised that so he actually did this. I don't know if he talked to her before we released the film and told her, but he was not supposed to release this information while she was living, if I understand. But her husband, his sister Vida, she got married, and the guy she was married to had a high security clearance at Los Alamos, which that's another major realm of conspiracy theory surrounding Los Alamos. People come up with all kinds of stories. You know, some are real, some are probably not. But he's working at Los Alamos, and he comes home one night, starts, you know, kicking back a few, and you know, one thing leads to another. A couple of drinks get in him, and he and his wife are having some drinks, and she decides to confess to him that she was, you know, had a history of being harassed by alien entities. It's funny how you'll live your whole life and you cover that up because you want to cover it up. You want to put it down in the deepest recess of your mind. You never want to talk about it again for your own mental sake. But now alcohol gets in you, and you're with your husband, and you decide, I'm going to go ahead and share some things. So she starts to tell her stories to her husband, and he says, this is crazy because, you know, I'm working in an alien base, basically. And so he starts telling some things that are going on at Los Alamos where he's working, and he's got an extremely high security clearance. The next day, he disappears.
Right.
Now, we don't know if the house was bugged. We don't understand. I mean, obviously, you would assume that when you work at a place like this, if you have a certain security clearance, I mean, you see it in the TV shows.
Yeah.
You see when somebody gets a certain security clearance working for, you know, for the Pentagon or something, it's like when they're gone, they're out having dinner, here comes this, like, non-existent operation into their house and bugs their entire house.
Yeah.
Well, his house would have had to have been bugged, in my opinion, because 24 hours later, there's no track of this guy anywhere. Nobody knows where he is. His wife's starting to freak out. She calls over to Los Alamos. They got no record of him. You know, we don't know anything about this. You know, he's not here. We haven't seen him. And so the story goes, Tom breaks this down in depth. He gives like every step of the story in the film. And so one thing leads to another, and her trying to find her husband. And so they finally say, look, your husband's gone, and he's not coming back. But there's no body. There's no body, and so
yeah, I think she was trying to get some of the insurance or some of the just the documentation in line, right? And she was having a problem because with some of that you have to like produce a body, a death certificate, and all this kind of stuff, and she couldn't get hold of some of those things to release some of the the money that was stored up for these types of situations.
Yeah, you can't get the benefits. Like if you don't have a death certificate, the paperwork can't get filled out, and you cannot receive the benefits that your husband's been working so hard for.
Right.
And so she worked for the federal government as well. And so interestingly, because of her connections and what she did, she was able to rattle the cage a little bit. She was able to go higher and higher and higher up and finally get some attention. She's saying, look, this is what happened. I'm getting a little sick and tired of all this. We haven't done anything wrong, but now my husband's missing, and he worked at Los Alamos. You start talking like that high up the command about he worked at Los Alamos. We're talking about aliens, and then he disappears. So finally, like with nothing else said, it's like, okay, you know what? Boom, here's your benefits.
Right.
Don't ever talk about this. Don't ever talk about this again.
Right. Yeah. Here's everything. Go away.
Yeah, and maybe I'm speculating here, but it's like in the movies. It's like, here's a little something extra for your trouble. I don't know if that happened or not, but
right.
It's crazy because she had to start talking and dropping facts, Gons. She had to start dropping facts about it all publicly, and they finally answered. That's the kind of stuff we're dealing with here. They don't want this information to get out, and this guy lost his life 24 hours later because he was holding a high security clearance at Los Alamos, and he talked. And boom, 24 hours later, he's gone. And there's no trace of the body, no nothing. So I say that just to say that this is some serious business, that when you're working for these facilities, at any point, you're considered disposable.
Yeah.
You're expendable. They don't care. And so anyway, I wanted to get into that story briefly because Tom goes through, and he actually tells quite a few more stories. Very fascinating stuff. His family has a history of where they were living. Some very strange activity was taking place. But he did release those stories in the film that he said he would never release publicly. He finally did it, and I'm very grateful because people need to know this. They need to know that this is not a conspiracy theory. This is very real. And then, Darren Geisinger, he talked about some of the experiments that were going on that were leaked out of the Collins Elite scenario. And some of those experiments were working on a technology to where you could sit in a psychic chair. Now, this kind of gets back into the idea of Stranger Things and the Project Montauk.
Right.
I've talked to Christopher Garetano, and I just want to give him a shout out real quick if I can. Christopher Garetano, he's not a Christian, but the guy's just a great researcher, and he made a film that really shook my walls called The Montauk Chronicles, and it's an ongoing investigation where he goes out and tries to investigate what took place. And when you're looking into that, you're dealing with satanic ritual abuse. Yeah. You're dealing with satanic ritual abuse where people actually think that they experienced things that they didn't. Such as time travel back to the times where Christ was crucified. This is the kind of stuff that it's all mind control experiments that the government's doing on people. So people come out of that and they think that they have been on the surface of Mars. Right. They think that they've been back at it's all mind control, psychic mind control. And so what Darren found out was that there were things going on with the bigger group, the group that the Collins Elite was trying to expose, that they were doing very much that type of technology and that type of ritual in these chairs that were like occultic charged objects, and they were working on technology where you could attack somebody psychically and kill them. Right. This is like the stuff of science fiction, but this was going on in the 40s and the 50s. Yeah. And obviously, if it was going on there, they were getting better and better and better at what they were doing, and they were making strong contacts with these entities which since the 40s they've been deeming to be interdimensional from the ethereal plane. Goodness, we're talking about just unbelievable spirit realm stuff. This is like right up the alley of what Mike Heiser talks about the unseen realm. Now, Mike Heiser, he has validated a guy by the name of Ray Boucher. Right. This is like, without Ray Boucher, we would have not done this project when we did. He's a guy that doesn't give interviews very regularly. He was the former head of MUFON for the state of Nebraska, a major player in the UFO community, and he was bringing a biblical perspective to UFOs even back before the internet. He was heavily engaged in the local UFO community as a Christian, right? Way back before we had this internet at our fingertips. Yeah. And he grew up with a very strong interest in this type of stuff. But Ray Boucher, he's an ordained minister. He's been a Baptist minister, a Lutheran minister. Very much, he's a theologian. I mean, the guy's a scholar when it comes to, and he's also an exorcist. I think that's important to add, is that he's also known as a Lutheran and a Baptist exorcist, which is fascinating. So because of his history, with deliverance, I like to use the term deliverance better than exorcisms, but he's got a strong history here, and he's a theologian, and he's an ordained minister, cross-denominational. And usually I'd be very weary about cross-denominational ministers. It's like, pick a team, No, I'm just kidding. But Ray Boucher, after spending time with him and talking to him, the guy is super sound in his doctrine. I mean, this guy, he knows the Word of God. He is sound in his theology. And the most important thing is he's filled with the Holy Spirit. Like, when you're with him, you feel that connection. Mm-hmm. This guy is awesome, and he's on fire for Jesus, and he loves evangelism. But he also has a whole lot of other stuff that he can offer.
Yeah.
And so he is he's got all this stuff in his history and his on his resume, if you want to go that route. And he gets contacted via phone by these two men who claimed to be secret agents of the Department of Defense of the United States. And he's like, this is interesting. Okay, these guys are telling me some things involving UFO and aliens and entities, and they needed to meet with him privately. They said, we need to go over some things with you, but we can't really do too much of it on the phone. We really need to meet with you privately. And so I guess, he prayed about it, felt like it was okay to meet with them. And so he meets with these guys. And before I tell you this, I just want to go on record again. Mike Heiser has vetted this guy. Mm-hmm. Mike Heiser is extremely, he's extremely scrutinizing when it comes to hashing through peer-reviewed research. Yeah. And so if Mike Heiser, and I don't agree with everything Mike says, we have difference of opinions on certain things. I'm kidding. Yeah. but what's amazing about Mike, it's like if Mike vets somebody who might be questionable.
Strong, pretty strong stamp of approval, if you will.
It really is. And so Heiser had vetted him, and as a matter of fact, Heiser knew him, knew about his research and knew about his claims, and he vetted him years ago. And so he goes and meets with these guys. These two guys from the Department of Defense, and they're telling him that they're involved in a federal group that doesn't exist, a limited access program again, and that the group is doing what he could only describe as satanic rituals inside of closed doors, inside of federal funded facilities. So what we're dealing with here is federal projects that are funded likely with taxpayer dollars, because that's generally how it works, right? Yeah. And they're using our tax dollars to perform satanic rituals and to open up another rift. They're trying to open, and they were successful. They opened up, they were in full communication with some group of entities, and they began to have a mentality of a we can do better mindset. This is what Ray said. I'm actually pretty much quoting him right now. He says that what started out as an investigation turned into a we can do better mentality. We can go deeper. We can communicate with higher entities. We can breach things that have not been breached thus far on the timeline. So they began to have a lust for more power, more communication, more technology, more rituals. And really, that's what happens in the occult, because that's why people move up in the occult, because it's more and more and more. They have the mentality of we can do better. And so he says that these two members of the DOD, they broke down all this stuff, and he tells a story in the film. Like, he just goes through and lays it all out, and how he even describes that they inferred that there was human sacrifice involved, and that this was all happening on federal, inside of federal facilities. And that there was a small faction of these men who were convicted that this was evil, and that they did not openly talk about it, but that they wanted to do some alternative research. And part of that alternative research was to bring in, what they were told was a priest that had a very supernatural worldview in regards to aliens and spirits and demons. And so they meet with Ray Boucher. They had and I believe, if I remember correctly, I believe he said they met twice. But they had multiple phone conversations. But here's where it gets really interesting. So everyone's telling us that we need to meet with Ray Boucher. Tom Horn says it. Derek Gilbert's telling us this. of course, Darren Geisinger is like, you got to talk to Ray. You got to talk to Ray. And everybody's pointing to Ray Boucher. Well, Ray Boucher's not talking to us.
Right.
I made contact with him, but as soon as I told him that I wanted to meet with him, I wanted to talk to him, and I wanted his story. I wanted his testimony on record.
Yeah.
Well, he was very cordial with me, and he says, well, I'm real busy right now. Things are really, with his job, and he had some things going on, and he says, I'm going to have to get back. So, weeks passed, and we're like, wow, we're already on this investigation, and, like, if we don't get him involved, because he's like, everyone's saying he's the guy to talk to. Like, we have to talk to him. And finally he comes through, and he's like, I'll do it. He says, y'all are going to need to come out here, and, and I'm like, well, okay, let me get some details. I mean, I'm a filmmaker. I need details. I need a production schedule. And, of course, that got thrown out the window because Ray won't even give us a day or a time. And all we had was, I'll do it, but I need to work out the details. So we finally get out to Nebraska. Like, he told us the window he would do it in, but we didn't even know until the morning of. Like, he wouldn't give us any details. He wouldn't tell us what time we're going to meet, anything. He wouldn't even agree on the place and the time until right beforehand. Like, we got a text message, and he's like, okay, we're going to meet you here at this time. That's pretty much how that went down. And so he met us at our hotel room. He wanted to meet in a private hotel room, but we didn't even know that that's where we were going to meet right away. I mean, like, everything was just, it was all last minute. Like, I mean, he didn't want to take any chances that anyone was going to be able to bust in on his discussion with us, because apparently the information that he knows and the men that reached out to him were older, and as far as he knows, they might not even be alive anymore. So it was very interesting. Mike Heiser vetted his stories. He vetted this guy's testimony, and he vetted him as an individual. So we had the honor and the pleasure of meeting Ray and his wife. And, I mean, it was crazy. And then what's really wild about all this is, like, we get home and we're finishing the film, and the film gets released. And now Ray is dealing with some major health issues, like some strange type of cancer that he's fighting right now. And this was not going on when we filmed him. And so I'm not trying to connect any dots here. I'm not trying to be Mr. Conspiracy Theorist, but I say that just to say, pray for Ray Boucher. If you're watching this video and you're a born-again Christian, please pray in Jesus' name for the healing of Brother Ray Boucher. He is a true brother in Christ, and he's done a lot to try to bring out and expose the alien agenda before the internet was even a thing. So I just wanted to mention that. But Ray told us some of the craziest stuff I've ever heard, and it was all being done in a modern scenario. We're not talking about the 40s or the 50s or the 60s. This has been going on. And so, we talked to Nick Pope. Now, Nick Pope wasn't in the film, but people know Nick Pope. He's got some connections with ancient aliens, and, he's a former British intelligence. Nick Pope, I believe he was in Arizona at the time, but I talked to Nick Pope. He was a very cool dude. I've always enjoyed some of his work. But Nick Pope told us that, he gave a little information to me and to Tom Horn separately, because Tom Horn has got connections with Nick Pope as well. I think Tom's interviewed him. But Nick Pope told us in so many words that there's enough information that he's seen that there's a very good chance that the Collins elite not only existed, but he says that there are groups just like that in all the governments. He says that there are groups, counterpoint groups, that are enough counterpoint groups in the alien stuff with governments that he says there's no reason to doubt this. Now, he didn't tell us that he had evidence on the Collins elite, but what he said was kind of short and to the point. And now he doesn't take the demonic view on everything like we do. He's got a different worldview. But regardless, he did validate the fact that there's very good evidence that this is going on in various governments. And look, the fact that Stan Deyo was involved in underground bases and was working on these projects, yet he was a Christian, and he began to have issues with some of the stuff going on.
Yeah.
It's evidence that there are factions in government today. Some of them are communicating with these things, some of them aren't. But the reason I bring that up is because we have evidence now that, even dating back to the 40s, that there have been things going on with high-up government groups, communicating with what we would know to be higher entities, fallen angels, demons, whatever you want to call them. We chose higher entities as a title because the people that are communicating with them do believe that they are like ascended master type level of, like they look at them as a godlike entity. They are higher, and technically they're higher than us in their, what people, what atheists would call evolution. We don't believe in that, but people who don't have Jesus, they look at it differently, and so they are looked at as higher entities. That's a very popular term in the New Age movement, higher entities. The fact is, they are going to be made very low when judgment comes, and Jesus always wins every scenario. So I want to be very clear, we're not looking at them as higher, but that's what we call the film, because that's the terminology that gets used in the New Age movement about higher entities. I don't know where we are on time. There's a couple other things that maybe we can hit on. I don't know. You're directing us here, so.
Well, I think, let's see, where are we at with the... I think we're still good. I guess I've been changing colors over here, it looks like. I'm like dark pink now. Awesome, fun. That's what I get for trying out this little system here. But yeah, I think on this channel we talk so much about transhumanism, technology, the technocracy, all this stuff. And actually, I'm going to pull something up. You can't see it, but I'll show the audience here. This is actually this is on indiegamesplus.com, and the game is called Devotionalia, Calls Out to Gods Through Rituals. And basically in this game you follow a high priest going about their daily tasks and preparing votives, sacrifices, and rituals. And you get to like kind of just pick out the rituals and kind of become the high priest type of thing. And you can see some of these like I guess seances or whatever they are with this game. But there's stuff like this out there a lot now, and I think it ties into this greater thing of how we are being treated by these entities as basically their vehicle to somehow return or manifest or something. Because it feels like there's you're probably familiar with Dr. David Jacob. He's a doctor. I think I don't know if he's an atheist, but I know he's not a believer. He's not a Christian. But he has, we interviewed him, and he wholeheartedly believes, based on his research, that there is this program. There's some kind of program running in the background that is making a human hybrid so that these alien beings can infiltrate our society, and they're doing it through a sort of slow infiltration into human genome, like a human genome type of thing. And he talks about the hybrids and the cobrids, and there's all kinds of stuff he gets into. But I feel like that and this idea of us using the technology with stuff like this, as game like Devotionalia or any other thing out there, it's really the same thing unfolding, because it all kind of goes back to the human mind and like the power of the human mind and all this kind of stuff. Ben Rich, he was the head of Skunkworks for Lockheed Martin, and I've talked about this on the channel before, but he basically is reported that he mentioned that they have the technology to bring ET back to the stars, and one of the ways that the technology, the UFO technology, works is based on some kind of mind-machine interface. And so that there seems to be a greater connection point with all of these things, these technologies, the VR, all this stuff, being an outworking of the kind of history that you're talking about within our governments, within the higher-ups and all this stuff, interacting with these higher entities and bringing about the development of not just a cultural, because culturally we're seeing it. The last week's Canary Cry News Talk, we talked about some guy, and I don't necessarily want to show the whole image here because it's really disturbing, but basically doing the alien look, like the forehead shaved, I'm going to send this to you, serpent eyes and alien cheekbones, Daglara trans-species aesthetic.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking. That's actually getting real popular these days, and people have been doing that for even back in the early 2000s, where they would get the tongue cut in the middle.
Right.
They get these implants to kind of create reptilian-looking nodes on their head. I mean, it's creepy stuff. It's very demonically inspired. Tattooing the eyeballs.
Right. So all those things seem to be an outworking, a continued outworking for us to accept these entities, either the good guys or the bad guys, right? That you were talking about that narrative, which I found interesting, that in reality these Nordic types, perhaps they have biologically engineered these alien gray types who are allegedly soulless, and they're more like meat suit robots that kind of just follow orders, and that they are going to be presented as the enemies of humanity, and then the Nordic types will come in and say, hey, we're the savior, we're going to help you guys, beat the gray alien, type. I've heard that narrative, and I don't know how it fits into the biblical prophetic vision. I mean, some people probably could make it fit, and there probably is some passages that seem to allude to things like that, but in general, it seems like the Great Deception does have something to do with a presence of these entities that are going to claim to be something they're not. But it really just ties into, when we talk about the days of Noah, Jesus in Matthew 24 discussing that whole thing. It's here, like we're living it now, and these people that are coming out talking about it, they are proof, in my opinion, that the trickling in of these entities, especially in the higher realms of, I mean, think about the everything that we've talked about today, the experiences, like Stan Deo can have a whole movie. He's a whole movie arc with his life story. Ray Boucher, same thing. These guys have these stories that are all, major motion picture worthy. They're these crazy experiences, and they are things that, in the context of our modern world, they're reacting differently. People probably had encounters with demons and stuff like that all throughout history, but something about this age that we're in now, this era, has presented us this opportunity to go further and push, and people like Jack Parsons being able to do Babylon working in the desert and all this kind of stuff. The technology that has been developed in our hands has all of a sudden become this tool to summon demons, basically, and that was always going to happen, it seemed like, and that was maybe the reason why God dispersed the languages at the Tower of Babel, because that's exactly what was taking place there. So there's so many parallels here.
I mean, like if anybody who's studied the works of Jacques Vallée, he laid out how throughout time, and I think we actually talked about this in the film in the beginning with Derek Gilbert, how if you study throughout the course of history, then you find out like the UFOs didn't always look like little shiny discs. Like the deception that the entities were bringing, it was always going to be based on the times. Like they were, and it goes back to what Aleister Crowley said, that today they're calling them angels and demons, and then tomorrow they're going to call them something else.
Right.
They're going to meet people where they're at. And I said this on the SGT report recently that we're dealing with different types of spiritual warfare. Like spiritual warfare is changing. It's looking different than it used to look, and they're these demonic forces, they're working with what they have. Like I said before, they're playing a long game here, and part of that is going to be to shapeshift, no pun intended, but to shapeshift how they're approaching mankind and how they're going to look to humanity, how they're going to present themselves in masquerade. But let me comment real quick on something you said about these guys that are wanting to look like aliens. It's nothing new, because if you go back into the old cultures like South America, where the Nephilim were predominantly worshipped as superhuman, we've got all these mummies down in South America that show. I mean, even people who deny the whole elongated skull, they say, well, that's all cradle boarding. Well, no, it's not. We've already proven on my podcast, and you've probably talked about it, that there's evidence. They've got fetuses, mummified fetuses inside of the womb that have elongated skulls, and these are on display in Paracas. So it's like you don't cradle board a fetus,
right?
But the reason I bring this up is because nowadays they're wanting to look like we're told aliens look like. They're wanting to look like the modern manifestations of the Greys or the Nordics or whatever these people are experiencing on their trips when they're entering into the spirit realm, on their drugs, their channeling. They come back from that experience and they want to try to make themselves look like these enlightened beings.
Right.
Well, that's exactly what was happening with the old cultures of the world, is that they were, even in ancient Egypt, people wanted to look like the gods, that they believed that's how the gods looked. That's all they knew. And so the elongated skulls, well, they tried to mimic that by cradle boarding and doing these other things.
What?
I promise you I won't put the thing in for 2 minutes, and I know you're playing GTA 5 and I get it.
You won't put what in? It's not the time, it's the stereo.
I want to put it in for a minute.
No, I turned the stereo off. You can use it. You all done?
Yeah. I'm done. Should be all done.
And these other entities, which, by the way, there are reports, I forget who it was that was on Joe Rogan, or there was some podcast this guy was on talking about an ayahuasca trip. It might have been Graham Hancock. I think it was Graham Hancock that Chad Riley said that he talked about having an encounter. And again, I could be wrong on the name, but one of these predominant guys that are pushing ayahuasca as a good spiritual thing.
Right.
He talked about having an alien experience. One of these prolific speakers spoke about having an encounter with a gray alien while they were in the other realm on DMT or ayahuasca. But
yeah, I've spoken to people who have this individual had a testimony actually that he was a big time druggie, was on LSD, he was in the desert, and he actually had an encounter with these grays, and he actually called for Jesus to come intervene, and in that moment the whole hallucination stopped and he was saved in that moment. So these are real things. People experience these things, and there's a solution here. That's kind of the thing. The reason why we talk about these issues is because the darker things get, it's like the more obvious the light becomes, and I think people that investigate these things, it really becomes clear if you're going down the path of the wheat or the path of the tares with this, because if you get involved, and I bring up someone like Dr. Stephen Greer, for example, he's gone down this path of like, they're all good guys, they're all benevolent, they're here to help us. Here, come to my camps for $3,000 each and sit out on a field and I'll summon them, or whatever he's got going on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically what he's doing. That sentiment, it's freaky to think about, but it's kind of like the future of politics, it's the future of geopolitics. It's all involved. It's going to have this extra dimensional element to it where people are tapping in and all this stuff, but it's not just a woo thing anymore. These entities seem to be more comfortable appearing to us, not just in like a paranormal sense, but whatever, like you were talking about, whatever fits the modern milieu. But in a sense, it's kind of like it doesn't matter their presence, because ultimately they want to destroy humanity. They know where they're headed. They're headed for the lake of fire, so they know that the more people they could take down with them, because the lake of fire, hell, wasn't made for us. It was made for the devil and his angels. So that's the purpose of hell. So for us humans, we're caught in this little area here where you can easily follow them to the pits of hell, or you can find salvation in Christ. So it's a really interesting topic that seems so crazy, right? But then also just gets right at the heart of, if you're a believer especially, what the whole thing is about. What this whole entire thing is about, this cosmos, all the purpose, all that stuff. So, I congratulate you on making this film, because I think it's a good documentary to just have in your back pocket, to be able to reference, and to be able to sit there and watch the real people, Ray Boucher, the Tom Horn telling a story, Stan Deo telling a story, and I think you have others in the film. Darren, the guy sitting here, which I was showing his book, Zero G's, which he gave me back in Branson a year ago. But, these folks, we're all talking about this issue, and I think it's going to fall on deaf ears for most believers, most people that are running churches and stuff. But it's becoming harder and harder to ignore it, and culturally.
It is, and the thing about this film is that we're diving into a different area, and
right.
What blows my mind here is like this stuff is not being talked about anywhere. Like there might be one or two people rattling off a little bit here and there, but for the most part, like we wanted to bring forward like a different segment of the alien deception that seems to just be sitting in the clouds right now. I mean, nobody's talking about this, and I mean, let alone.
Sorry. I just want to chime in, because I think what's happening is there's a little bit of, and I've noticed this especially after about 2015, especially after the flat Earth thing became a big thing. And I understand there are still people that investigate that and all that, but there's this fatigue of the whole alien deception in the world of like fringy conspiracy people, because or at least Christian believers, because it seems like, oh yeah, we figured that out. Like it's the demons, it's Nephilim, whatever. We figured it out. So what's next? The Earth is flat. Whatever. They're on to the next thing. And it seems like there's a burnout, like people are just burned out about this topic. But I like what you did here, because you sort of bring it back to, okay, what's the documented information here? What's the actual personal experiences? And let's kind of put that together and present it to people, because it not just, not only does it reinvigorate the conversation, but it shows that these are real things. It's not just a fantasy book or a sci-fi thing to tap into. It's more real, and that's, I think, what people are looking for, is the real stuff. So I commend you for making
exactly.
the film.
No, thank you. I appreciate that, and that was like one of the things that we were excited about, was to be able to tap into some areas that are they're overlooked. And I mean, look, we can all agree that there's something going on with UFOs and aliens, but to be able to tap into things at what I would call like a federal, non-existent level, to be able to tap into those things with actual documents, with actual eyewitness accounts, it's a game changer for some people. Like, this is going to be the missing link film for certain people that were on the fence, because it's like now we're presenting, men of God who were either involved in some of these programs, connected with those involved, or family was involved. And so being able to present that, my hope and prayer is that people will be able to watch this and realize, and even be encouraged. And the fact is, we can't just move on to the next big thing. I mean, we have to be keeping an eye, because this is the thing. In our opinion,
it's like the big thing.
Yeah, this is the thing that is continuing, like we've said several times. This is a long game. This is not just somebody looking to hit a fast lick. This is the long game. It's been going for a long time. And look, from the beginning of time, where things have been recorded as governments of the world, and cultures around the world have been recording and documenting their history according to their people, whether we call it mythos or whether we call it oral tradition.
Oh, another frozen moment. Let's see if we can get through this one.
And controlling.
Oh, okay, you're back.
We end up with this massive. Treasure trove of cultural stories that validates that since the beginning of time, higher entities have been controlling and manipulating the governments and the cultures of this world, and that it's nothing new. It's been going on since the beginning of time. That's why we brought Derek Gilbert into the project, because he's an expert historian on a lot of the old world views on this stuff. And we were going to bring Michael Heiser in. We talked to Mike, but it just our schedules, we couldn't get things lined up. But this is a very fascinating topic to dig into, and I hope it's well received. The film is done in a creative way. It's done in a retro wave 80s guerrilla filmmaking format, like old film. But we had a lot of fun doing it, and I hope it's well received.
Yeah, it goes back to that passage. I think it's Matthew 4. I'm trying to pull it up here. But basically, Jesus gets taken up to the mountain, the high place, and Satan basically says you can have all this for worship. And I think the same offer has been given to all the kings of the earth ever since the time of Jesus, and I think many of them have taken the offer. And that's what we're seeing manifest in our culture today. And again, the conversation needs to continue to take place, and hopefully this is something that you can share with your friends and family and talk about, because it does. People are oversaturated with information, but again, the way you did it with no flash, no visuals really, other than the camera, individuals speaking. I like the way you did it. And just one more time, where do people go to find the film?
fourthwatchfilms.com. You've probably had it up at some point in the talk, but Fourth Watch Films, all spelled out, FOURTHWATCHFILMS.com. We've actually got a promo right now. You can get the DVD of Higher Entities, or you can get we have a double feature where you can get Hollow Earth Chronicles and Higher Entities for 20% off right now. Or you can stream it immediately. Some people are ready to watch this thing immediately. They want to go ahead and watch it. Well, it's all there linked up at fourthwatchfilms.com. And we've got some pretty interesting characters that we were blessed enough to get together in this film. And I tell you, I want to say one more time, things are getting crazier and crazier with our culture and with world government and just the direction everything is going. And I think it's very important that we are able to document these things dating back in American government and politics back in even to the 40s, because here we are now approaching 2020, and I don't know if this is going to air in 2019 or 2020, but regardless, like here we are at the at the threshing floor of it is. And to think that our government at the highest levels has been working continuously with what they're deeming to be extra-dimensional or interdimensional entities, and the terminology that they throw around in these documents is right out of the playbook of Thelema, right out of Theosophy, and it's crazy stuff. I mean, like, you can't make this stuff up. They knew what they were doing back then. People were scared about it. They tried to warn people. People have lost their lives for much less than the information that these people released in this film.
Yeah.
So I hope people will check it out and enjoy that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think that's Tom Horn kept warning you in the film. Just be careful. And I've heard
he lost his brother-in-law. I mean, his brother-in-law got killed because of this. So I mean, obviously it's personal to him,
And I know Aaron and Melissa Dykes, they were warned. Be careful when you go down this trail. We're willing to, people like you guys are willing to risk your life basically to at least put this type of information together. And look, I probably think that there's certain areas that maybe you didn't want to go down, not just because of your own safety, but perhaps there's just no point in digging into certain areas, do as the Lord leads you. But I think it's important for people to understand that, like, this information is really stuff that really bad people don't want you to know. They really don't want you to even consider it. They don't want it to even be a thought in your mind in the daytime. They just want you to watch your Netflix shows like the Messiah, the new Messiah Netflix show coming out, and just get your vaccines and just be a good slave, And what's really behind it seems to be entities that are not from here and that don't have humanity's best interest in mind. So, again, thank you, Justin, for taking time to talk about your film, and hopefully you guys out there will go check it out and go grab a copy, and support the whole ministry, what they're doing, because him and his brother, I think you guys just kind of traveled around and made this film happen, right? There was no
look, people are always asking there. There's always somebody out there that has a problem that we sell DVDs and live streams.
Right.
I want to go on record. Like, we've given away so many copies of every film we've ever done, but when people understand that it costs a lot of money to travel around the United States and to interview people, or to have them travel out to you, and then you've got you got to work on it for 8 to 11 months to get editing done and everything else. I mean, it's a lot of work that goes into it. So we pray that that we can continue to do this. It's a blessing to us to be able to put information out there in a format that's entertaining and in a format that can be shared with others. And that's one thing I love about people buying the DVDs, is that they're able to pass them around and share them with family members and check them out with friends. We were just over at Michael Lake's place, Dr. Michael Lake. He was taping watching one of his Kingdom Intelligence briefings, and so we go over there, and and he's been so supportive of us. Like he's rooted us on from the first film we put out. I didn't realize like he paid for all of our films, and I'm like, man, I would have given you a copy because But Michael Lake, he had a copy of Hollow Earth and a copy of Higher Entities that we gave him, even though we already had them, and even that day he was lending those out. Like he says, this is great because now I have copies that I can lend out that are not my own personal copies.
Right.
And so like while we were there, he lent out the films, and so I mean that's what I want people to do. I want them to lend them out and let people see them and watch them and just absorb whatever it is that they can take from all this. But at the end of the day, people supporting our ministry by buying the films, that allows us to continue to do this and continue to put out a new film every year.
Yeah.
So we are greatly appreciative of everybody that supports our ministry by either watching it online or by ordering the DVDs. So thank you very much, everybody.
Very cool. Dude, the 2040s are probably going to be kind of gnarly. Lest the Lord returns and puts an end to all this. When we get to the 2040s, it's about 100 years since a lot of that crazy UFO stuff started happening, at least openly, in the United States. So it'll be interesting to see where we'll be at in the next couple decades. Maybe we'll be doing live stream VR, in-person image, I don't know, something like that. DNA
Who knows,
talk.
man?
Just
It's
upload
crazy.
my DNA to you, and then we can have a conversation. Anyway, all right. Thank you,
I
Justin.
don't want your DNA uploaded, bro. Just so you know.
Hey, you were saying how Asians just stay younger, so maybe we are already genetically engineered, and you do want my DNA to stay younger.
I didn't think about that. Maybe I'll pray about it.
All right, Justin. Thank you so much for your time, man.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much, man. God bless, bro.
Billy workout. I'm gonna say bad guy. Very friend.
Hey, what's up, guys? Gons here from the Face Like the Sun channel. I had a chance to sit down with my good friend Justin Fall of The Fourth Watch, and he's also a filmmaker, and he just released Hollow Earth Chronicles Episode 1, The Dark Chambers. And you guys definitely need to check this out. But even if you can't, in my discussion with Justin on this video here, we get into some of the topics that are covered and talk about not just the Hollow Earth, but how all this relates to everything going on right now, the bigger picture, the prophetic nature of everything, and help us grasp this dimensional reality that we're living in that I think the Bible actually tells us about. But most people have completely materialized everything and had forgotten that we live in a supernatural reality where the world above and the world below seems to have common themes. For example, time dilation. So we get into some of that in this discussion. Apart from the interview, I will occasionally jump in for references and some more information, but otherwise, here's my discussion with Justin Fall, talking about his documentary, Hollow Earth Chronicles, Episode 1, The Dark Chambers.
And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord, and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Job 1:7.
The world consists of vast cultures with stories that constantly connect their gods with the inner earth. And not just their gods, but reptilian races of hybrid entities. We're talking superhumans, strange animal creatures, or what the Book of Giants refers to as monsters. When you're dealing with the areas around the world where so much myth, legend, oral tradition, and belief, contemporary belief, there's always almost an embracing of the underworld.
The earth is actually dynamic. By that, what I mean is that, we all go to work every day, we get in our car, we are driving over a shell under which, according to the Bible, there is supernaturalism, there are entities, there are creatures, there are beings.
If you were going to hide something and keep something secret, there's two places to do it. One is in the deep, deep oceans. The second place is a labyrinth, a network of tunnels and areas which go deep underneath the earth.
There was truth to this idea that this race called the Vril-Ya had been existing under the earth since the days of the Great Flood in the antediluvian world. In fact, the belief of the Vril-Ya and of the power of Vril was actually so prominent among German occultists that it gave birth to a secret society, one of the most notorious secret society involving the Nazi regime, called the Vril Society.
The Nazi expedition to Shambhala originally started in Greenland with the Edda. The Edda were ancient Nordic writings describing a hollow earth. They went there to see if they could find further details or information. This was the top of their agenda. They had to find this opening. And the next thing you know, they had the Schwabenland expedition to the Queen Maud Land area of the Antarctic. It's what drove them. It was a religious belief that drove them to cordon this area off and claim it for their own.
When I read Admiral Byrd's description of things that he saw and how it felt going into this abyss type of opening, but it also was a long time ago, and we've learned a lot about quantum physics since then. We've learned a lot about how these types of things would work, and there are too many descriptions in there of things that he saw that line up with current quantum physics understanding.
The underworld of our people, very similar to the Cherokee stories, the Creek stories, the Mayan Incan stories of underwater panther and these underworlds where there was completely different civilizations that lived under there.
We know in the Bible that the Watchers, the angels who kept not their first estate, according to Peter, are kept in chains in Tartarus until the judgment, kept in darkness until the judgment. Tartarus, in Greek mythology, is as far below Hades. It's not Hades, it's as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. That's where the Watchers, according to Peter, have been confined.
Undefeated Tank Davis battled Joe York's Gamboa in an explosive title fight. In 2019 with the bang. Ring out the year and on Showtime.
Are these all Spotify playlists? Wow. Billy, you good? I'm good, Mom. Hey, you good? Billie Eilish, because I guess that might be being obsessed with Billie Eilish over there. Cute. This one isn't a playlist. When we all fall asleep, where do we go? It's Spotify's most streamed album of the year. Wow. Sounds terrifying, bro. Is it really? That's crazy.
And what we're finding out is that the fallen angels and demonic entities have been molding the views. They've been molding the cultures, and hyper-intentionally, they've been molding the religions of the world. They've been literally priming the world for the greatest deception of all time. And we are fast approaching that time right now, according to the Bible.
It goes back to my research. I'd always heard conspiracy theories about the Hollow Earth, and it sounded interesting to me. It was obviously kind of a cool topic, mostly coming out of the New Age movement. But when you start to see passages in Scripture that refer to inside the earth, and there's many references to inside the earth in the Bible, but the one that really caught my attention was in Job. Satan goes before the Lord, and it says that God asks him, where have you been and where did you come from? And it says, whence comest thou in the King James. And Satan says, I've been going to and fro, back and forth, up and down in the earth.
And many people will overlook this passage. I know I did many times, but when you start to think about it, it's very telling that Satan is doing something inside the earth. And some of the newer translations, albeit some of them have good translations in certain parts of the Bible, but they've changed the word from in the earth to on the earth. And the problem we get with that is that the rest of the description that we read in Scripture, up and down, to and fro, back and forth, it's painting a picture. And you can't fulfill those directional movements if it's just on top, but rather inside. And so the King James, I think the New Jerusalem, and there's possibly one or two other translations that say in the earth. And that kind of sparked my interest to go further, because I now knew that there was a biblical precedent to a hollow earth or a subterranean realm. Of course, many people know about hell, Abraham's bosom, things like that. But I started to dig deeper, and I found many passages, which we break down in the film. We go through a handful of passages, break them down contextually, to get a better understanding that there are things going on inside the earth. So that really catapulted me into this area of research.
Do you actually think that it's like, 'cause when people say hollow earth, they imagine, literally like a balloon or like a ball, right? Where it's just like all hollow on the inside. Is that what's going on? Or are we talking about caverns and like different, like a whole honeycomb network going on? What's happening?
I think there's, it's one of those situations where it can be everything and all inclusive. And again, there's going to be a certain amount of speculation when we get into this, because nobody, at least none of our colleagues, can really go down into the earth to explore it for ourselves. But many people have gone down, and so yes, there are caverns, there are massive networks of tunnel systems, even underground cities, ancient underground cities, which many people have written about. Some of them mystical, some of them just normal cities that any human can approach. But the other side of that is we're dealing with supernatural, or what we would say dimensions. There are many cultures around the world, especially getting into the Native Americans and the South Americans, Mexican Indians, Mesoamericans, and they have many stories about going down into these cavernous systems, and then once they were there would be a ritual or a certain location that they could go to. There would be some type of a portal that would open up, and as strange as that may sound to some people, there's not always magic involved in opening up a portal. I mean, when you have ancient rites that take place up on the surface, leading a person down into the earth, some of these Native Americans, they would go through these protection rituals. Joseph Riverwind talks about they would go through protection rituals before they would go down into these caverns. Sometimes they would swim down through a waterway inside the earth. We've got bodies of water inside the earth, and then they would go through that cavernous system of water up into another location, and there would be a portal that they would swim through or crawl through, and then they would retrieve some type of an ancient object. Now, this object could be one of many different things, different types of artifacts, but then that object would be brought back to the surface world to prove that person's worth. That was kind of a ritual ceremony for somebody to become a man in order to be a warrior in their tribe. So you've got extra-dimensional qualities, extra-dimensional stories of some people will see it, some people won't. It depends on the person. Have they been communicating with entities? Have they gone through rituals on the surface before going down into the earth? There's a lot of variables that play into this. But I want to say that all of those aspects are true, but you bring the bottomless pit into the equation, and I think that is a very controversial area, because, we have two major factions in research pertaining to the shape of the earth. You have people that believe in a flat earth, and then you have people that believe in a globe earth. Now, regardless of where people land on the shape of the earth, what we know for a fact is that there is a subterranean realm. But the idea of a bottomless pit, it's always been my idea, my belief system since I've entered into this research, that the bottomless pit would be the pole. We're dealing with a pole that's going to, and again, flat earth, a lot of the flat earth people don't like the idea of a north and south pole, because they say that that's not part of their model. But when you start to research it, you find out that God's word, regardless if you take the flat earth or the round earth side, there is a bottomless pit in the realm of earth. So I take the idea I lean more towards the idea that there are elements of elements of flat Earth and round Earth working together. I think you and I talked about this on an episode of Canary Cry, but I do believe there's a North and South Pole, absolutely, and I think that the pole would likely be the candidate for the bottomless pit.
But it's almost like a toroidal-shaped kind of donut.
It's hard to say because I've never been up into space.
That's what I always say about all these topics with, or at least the shape of the Earth discussion. I always say I haven't been up high enough to tell you. Some people claim they have, but I think there's something that goes along with, the abyss being something that the ancient Israelites saw as the seas, right, kind of the ocean. But then that's not wrong either if we talk about maybe certain dimensional qualities. I had a story of, and there's no way for me to confirm this, but somebody that was in the military, or I had a friend whose son was in the military, and he said that, usually he would get a call every week from his son just to kind of check in on, how things are going. Well, he didn't get a call for a couple weeks, and, a few weeks later he got a call and said, I couldn't call because I was under Arizona. And he's in the Marines, apparently does like submarine work kind of stuff. And they thought he was kind of joking, but he was like, no, I was under Arizona from the ocean. So you can get under Arizona from the ocean. I think there's a lot more going on, and the military knows a lot more. Did you find anything in your research that would suggest that there is some kind of cover-up of this, of at least an underworld?
Yeah, absolutely. In the film, we interview a wide variety. I think we got a lot of the heavy hitters from the Christian research area. I mean, we've got L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, Tom Horn, Joseph Riverwind, myself, Josh Peck, Derek Gilbert, Jim Wilhelmsen. L.A. Marzulli, he brings some stories about other military guys who had been over in the Middle East. Now, putting aside the whole Kandahar Giant thing, because these are two separate events, but there are stories of these teams of soldiers going down into cavernous systems. Now, they enter through a cave, so it's a cave on the surface, but they enter through it, and then they travel down. I mean, it's a clear path for them to go through. They're going down. Before they know it, they're down beneath the surface of the earth in these underground cities where giants are. And they tell stories of whole civilizations of modern-day hybrids, giants, living down under the earth. Then you get over to the United States, and there are many stories, especially off the coast of California, that I've heard, where there will be UFOs that they'll be seen over the water, they'll come down, they'll literally go underwater and just disappear. Now, it's my opinion that they're going down through some type of a gateway. Now, could it be that they're going underwater, entering in, maybe flying into an opening in the ground? I don't know. But what I do know is that this kind of lines up with the Hebrew understanding of the story of Jonah, which Tom Horn breaks down in our film about Baravak, or the city of gates. And breaking down the story of Jonah, we find out that Jonah went down to a place called the city of gates. And obviously when we start to investigate the word gate, we find out that there are doorways, gates, portals, openings into another dimension or another realm. So I think there's a major connection, and you've seen the film. In the film we show that there's connections with spirits in water and entrances through water into the hollow earth. And again, I use the term hollow earth because that's the popular term that we find in the mainstream. Some people like to call it the subterranean realm. Some people call it hollow earth, whatever you want to call it. But many connections with spirits, entities, the water, and hollow earth. So, I probably went a little longer on that question than you anticipated.
No, it's good because I think if you really look back, there are a lot of stories like that. I know, just in my youth, I was given a few stories, just Japanese folklore. So the first story I was referencing is the Utsurobune, or the hollow ship, and it refers to an unknown object which allegedly washed ashore in 1803 in Hitachi province on the east coast of Japan, and according to the legend, an attractive young woman arrived on a local beach aboard the hollow ship. And this image of the hollow ship is very interesting, as it looks kind of like a UFO. There's another one where actually there's a man who decides to is invited to go down into the world under the oceans or whatever. This is called the Urashima Taro, and it's a Japanese fairy tale. In the story, a fisherman named Taro rescues a turtle, which in gratitude carries him to the dragon palace that lies beneath or beyond the sea. There he is entertained by the Princess Otohime as a reward. He spends what he believes to be a few short days, but upon his return to his home village, he finds himself 300 years into the future. And when he opened a box that was given to him and was told never to open on the surface, he instantly turned into an old man. Basically, the box was holding his age, the actual time of his realm, which is very interesting and very similar to what modern physicists describe as the sort of time difference and experience that can occur when you go and travel far distances. And so, given in this folklore, this Japanese folklore, are weird time-shifting, preservation of time, youth, eternal youth type of overlap, but all coming from these entities with a civilization that lives underwater. So, yeah, absolutely, there's probably something going on down there that, James Cameron going down there, doing whatever, riding around in his little submarine thing. You probably have plans to do something like that eventually.
Yeah, hopefully, if I can get the funding,
Yeah. So yeah, and I thought you did a really good job in the film to summarize all these different ideas, because there is a lot of evidence, and I think there's a lot of questions as to what's really going on. And you're right, it's hard to really nail down, because it's like, what are we going to do? We can't like get up high enough to necessarily see anything. We can't necessarily go down far enough. Presumably without running into these entities, or at least maybe not being able to come back. How much of do you think people gone missing, people perhaps even faking their death, dare I say, celebrities or whatnot? Do you think that people are retiring, quote unquote, into that world? I mean, is it possible that there's stuff going on down there? If there's giants walking around, then is it possible that the high level, dark technology that they've been developing also exists, and people that science fiction galore down there with maybe they got Hitler on some kind of brain machine robot? I mean, I don't know, I'm just throwing stuff out there, but how many people do you think are in the know about something like this?
Well, the government is definitely in the know. Headlines across the globe, you've got these military groups going underground, setting up underground cities, underground bunkers. We have more underground or deep underground military bases and establishments where they are doing all types of research, transhumanism, creating of chimera embryos. We've got stories of the Dulce base, or Dulce. They've got the level down there that people call the zoo, and then you've got a level where there are entities that are in charge. And again, this is stuff that's really hard to vet. But was it William Cooper, I believe? William Cooper. Am I getting his name right? Is it William?
Yeah, Bill Cooper.
Who's no longer with us, but he told stories of firsthand accounts, and he was a government geologist, and he said he was down there in multiple levels underneath the earth in the deep underground military bases. He came face to face with entities. There's a lot of very strange, spin-offs of his stories that we hear from different people who claim to have been down there or have family members who have been down there. But I think that there's a mixture. I know the government is doing a lot under the earth. The Nazis, this really takes us back to the Nazis when we start thinking about government involvement and what are the governments of the world doing inside the earth. The Nazis, they have a religious system set up, or they had, and that system was based on this esoteric belief that the Nazis were descendants from this race called the Aryans. And this was a supernatural race. It ties back to theosophy. You get into the world race. Like, they would come back and forth on the surface, under the surface. And the Nazis believed that they are a watered-down descendant of the Aryan race. And so it was their goal, first and foremost, to try to locate the opening to a hollow earth. There was a German magazine called Der Spiegel, and they came out, I forget what year it was, but they came out and they announced that we have found the opening to the hollow earth. And we also have to understand that most of Nazi Germany, at least by majority, was in support of the Nazi Party. Now, there was a lot of people that were not, they were not fans, they did not support Hitler, But by majority, they bought into this ideology that they were somehow supernaturally connected to this race called the Aryans, and they wanted to purify their bloodline, kind of like a dominionism theology of their day, where they could purify their bloodline and kind of set up their own kingdom to be reunited with the gods of old, the Aryan race. And so Hitler made it a major part of his checklist to get down into the Hollow Earth. We have multiple places where this took place. We know that they were welcomed by the Tibetan monks. They were able to go down into an area that they call Shambhala. This is the records that have been passed on say that the Nazis actually made it into the Hollow Earth in this area through the Himalayan mountains. And when they were able to go in there, they came into contact with this group called the White Brotherhood. Now, this isn't like the KKK. You know, it sounds kind of like that, but we're dealing with nothing less than the Ascended Masters. And so the Nazis were given entrance and sanctuary in Tibet. They were taken down with the monks. They were shown the secret places to get in. They had connections with entities. Then they came back. That was just one of their expeditions that took them into the Hollow Earth. Another expedition is Antarctica. And if we have time, I want to get into that. But that ties in with the American government as well, because there was a lot of fighting going on. And still to this day, there's so much interest in Antarctica. And I think it's important to note that Antarctica is on the record as having more than one opening. Not just one. We now have records from British intelligence and U.S. intelligence that there's multiple openings in Antarctica into the subterranean realm. Now, if you research what the Nazis did before the Exodus, I call it the Exodus, before, during, and after the Second World War, Nazis were already going down to Antarctica and setting up a secret base known as Base 211. So, and this is in their records. You can read about this. They had mapped it out, they had charted out the area, and they had set up this Base 211, which some people claim doesn't exist. But it had to have existed if we study what the Nazis did in their timeline. There was something down there that they had set up. What happened was they had faked Hitler's death after the war. And Hitler, along with many others, there are different records, different accounts that claim up to 1 million or a little over 1 million. Some people believe it was 500,000, but we've got a massive amount of Nazis. They're thinkers, they're doers, they're shakers, doctors, occult magicians, psychic mediums, scientists, everything. The elite of the Nazis that had the most brain power, they went on this massive exodus down to Antarctica. And they've been setting up shop down there. And so we find out later that this makes sense when we study Operation High Jump, because our government sent Admiral Byrd down into the Arctic. We had people from Britain and Australia going with us, and we went down there. They told the American public that it was going to be an exploration mission, and there's different things involved with that. But when we study the ships that were part of this, there was a massive undertaking that our government did, and they went down there. There was not one laboratory ship that was set up for scientific research. What we had icebreakers, we had warships. Literally, when they went down to Antarctica, they went down there prepared for war. And what we find out later is that this mission, this Operation High Jump, it ended much earlier than it was supposed to, because they met opposition down there. Some people speculate that the opposition was extraterrestrial in nature, because we do now have reports of British intelligence going to Antarctica and coming back reporting to have seen Yetis. Now, some people may laugh at this idea, but there are reports of, top... it blows my mind to even say this, but we're dealing with top security cleared British intelligence coming back and saying that they saw Yetis or abominable snowmen down there. Now, I don't have an answer for that. I can't tell you if it was some type of entity. I don't know if it was an entity. I don't know if it was a hybrid creation that was created down there, some type of a chimera. I don't know. But it blows my mind to consider this, because now people are saying that they met force with aliens down there. I believe, with all of my research, that we fought the Nazis down at Operation High Jump in Antarctica. We got our butts kicked. Some of the ships, that they were removed from the logs. One of the ships we cover in the film is the USS Pine Island. And the Pine Island, interestingly, it got removed. It was literally lost, according to the records, for a certain span of time. Now, it shows back up later on ship logs, and they even had some ceremonies surrounding the ship when they retired it, but it disappeared off the logs for a certain amount of time. Now, it's my belief that they had to repair the ship, and they didn't want the American population or the public to know that there were laser beam technologies that were shot out of UFOs cutting through the ships. There's a lot of eyewitness accounts from American soldiers who went down there. They've come back, they've told the stories to their family. The stories have been passed down, and our government is hush-hush about it. They literally did not want to talk about what actually happened down there. They came up with a cover story, and that was that. They put out a propaganda documentary called The Secret Land, and that pretty much showed the view of Operation High Jump that they wanted people to believe.
Yeah.
But Admiral Byrd, he was the guy that led that expedition. Eyewitness accounts from American soldiers who went down there, they've come back, with all of my research, that we fought the Nazis down at Operation High Jump in Antarctica. We got butts kicked. Some of the ships, that they were removed from the logs. One of the ships we cover in the film is the USS Pine Island. And the Pine Island, interestingly, it got removed. It was literally lost, according to the records, for a certain span of time. Now, it shows back up later on ship logs, and they even had some ceremonies surrounding the ship when they retired it. But it disappeared off the logs for a certain amount of time. Now, it's my belief that they had to repair the ship, and they didn't want the American population or the public to know that there were laser beam technologies that were shot out of UFOs cutting through the ships. There's a lot of eyewitness accounts from American soldiers who went down there. They've come back, they've told the stories to their family. The stories have been passed down, and our government is hush-hush about it. They literally did not want to talk about what actually happened down there. They came up with a cover story, and that was that. They put out a propaganda documentary called The Secret Land, and that pretty much showed the view of Operation High Jump that they wanted people to believe.
Yeah.
But Admiral Byrd, he was the guy that led that expedition, and we have a lot of interesting allegations towards this man, Admiral Byrd. We also have Forrestal, James Forrestal. He was thrown off of his out of his hospital. What was it, like the third story of his hospital?
Right.
I forget what the hospital was called. It was in Bethesda, Maryland. I'm trying to think of the name of the hospital. But he was in this hospital. He was thrown out. I think it was the third story. He's thrown out the window, and he dies. And this all happened after he came out publicly, and he started to tell people that he had the secrets of Antarctica that he wanted to share with the world. We couldn't keep it from the American people, but the government higher up said, "You're not going to tell anybody," and they threw him out of the window. So there's a lot of conspiracies surrounding Antarctica, what took place in Operation High Jump, and we do a really good job in the film of breaking down what happened on a timeline and disproving some of the popular beliefs about it. But then we also go into the Admiral Byrd scenario. There's this diary that appeared, and it's kind of surfaced, and it's claiming to be Admiral Byrd's diary. And I'm sure you know this is a controversial topic because many people don't believe that it was his, right, but many people do. But we actually had a voice actor come into the studio, and we recorded a dramatized version of Admiral Byrd's diary, which we put in the film as well. And, Jim Wilhelmsen, he doesn't believe that the dating is correct. He believes that the information is correct, but the dating is not correct. He believes it was from Admiral Byrd's first North Pole expedition, and that it was kind of edited and put out around the time following Operation High Jump. But, Admiral Byrd's not the only person to say that he's come into contact with entities inside the pole. He's not the only person to say that he dealt with UFOs. He's not the only person to say that he's flying towards the North Pole, and then all of a sudden the Arctic icy conditions dissipate into like this lush, beautiful Jurassic Park looking forest. Right. And Admiral Byrd also, if it's his diary, which I believe it is, he also gets into this whole thing where mammoths show up on their flight. The same mammoths that we've been told have been extinct for however many years. So there's a lot of mystery about the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole. We have other accounts that we cover in the film of sailors who sailed into the North Pole, and they lived down there for so many years, and when they came back onto the surface, and by the way, they lived down there with giants. This is all part of Olaf Jansson's biography, and he was a Norwegian sailor. He and his son sailed down in there. We break this down in the film, but he explained that when they came back to the surface, that the time was different. So like the time passing under the earth, this kind of gets me thinking extra dimensional, right? But he said the time that passed down there was different. So when they got up to the surface, it was like they had been down there for a different span of time than they were actually down there.
And this kind of lines up with the Chuck Missler teaching that if two twins were to go to the closest star on a spaceship and come back, one twin goes, one stays. By the time one gets back from going to the closest star in space, they're not the same age anymore. Right. So there's a difference in how time is perceived and how time plays out inside the Earth and as we get up into space.
Or what they call space, yeah. It's really interesting. Just recently, you probably heard about this, National Geographic actually came out with an article that says, hole the size of Maine opens in Antarctica ice. And, okay, they're like, oh, we don't know what's going on, but giant hole appears in Antarctica. And then all the people going down there, the conspiracy world has been kind of looking at it for a while. But I wanted to kind of ask you, I don't know, you don't have to get political per se. I want your commentary on sort of the modern situation here, because I'm curious about what you think in terms of, I've talked about on my channel how there's a weird thing happening with the whole Trump presidency in that, the topic of UFOs and aliens and stuff has been shelved and not really talked about, which is understandable. There's like all this other crazy stuff going on. I get it. But at the same time, he's got a really interesting history, right? His uncle met with, or was one of the first people to try to decode the Tesla papers once they were confiscated. And there's also this weird connection here, of maybe a coincidence. Author Ingersoll Lockwood in 1890 or 1900, I guess is the year it was published, wrote a book called Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, where he goes, through, I think it's through Russia, he goes to the cavernous underground, and, goes on his adventures and whatnot. I mean, it's really kind of a weird situation there. Do you think that there's a connection with all of this, in that, like, there's a group that probably runs everything out of there, that it's kind of like an HQ for what we call New World Order, Illuminati? Do you think it all ties into that whole scenario?
No, are you asking about Antarctica specifically, or the Hollow Earth complex?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I guess the underworld itself, but then Antarctica being sort of that, maybe a post, in between these worlds or whatever, and they, I don't know, what do you think? What's the hype? Are they the inter-Earth beings trying to take over the surface again, or what's kind of the larger narrative at play?
Yeah, so Antarctica is very interesting in the fact that the governments of the world have a major interest in it right now. We're talking about, like, the big players in America. John Kerry's been down there, Obama, the Pope. I'm trying to think of the guy. I think his name's Bartholomew, the Russian or the Greek Orthodox Church. He's like the Pope for the other side. There's a lot of rumored allegations that all these people are regularly going down there. Why? There's something going on there. Now, the United States has had a military/political presence there. I believe it was since 1957. And we also, something that we need to note is that the Perry Reese map.
When reality stars get together.
I see you brought your own butler.
This is crazy, man, but the Perry Reese map, it shows Antarctica without ice. So,
right.
And some people I've talked with some of my friends and fellow researchers, and there's a theory out there that I kind of lean towards, that it's possible that the ice in Antarctica was created with technology, that they've used some type of technology to ice it over to create this ice shelf to protect what they're doing in Antarctica. Kind of like the last frontier that no man can go to. I mean, you don't just go to Delta Airlines and say, I want to book a flight to Antarctica. You just don't go hang out there. It doesn't work like that. It's probably easier to go to Cuba than it is to go to Antarctica. But regardless of that, I think there's a center set up there. I think that there is, I don't want to call it an industrial complex, but there's something going on there where with massive technology involved. I believe there's research going on there that would probably not be legitimate to practice here in the States for multiple reasons. So it's hard to say, but I definitely believe that the cabal, if you just want to call it the cabal, the NWO, I think that some of the key players are dealing inside of the Earth in different places. And when we study some of the Nazi writings, we find out that there are tunnels inside the Earth that connect pole to pole. Literally, like they believed that you could travel all around like literally from side to side, pole to pole, inside the earth. That there were ancient tunnel systems that were created before, I don't want to say before mankind, but there's a lot of theories out there. I don't want to sound unbiblical in what I say, but this is based on what they teach. So
like a pre-Adamic race kind of situation.
Yeah, basically the gods of old created these tunnels, and that's what we would call them, the gods of old, the fallen angels. They created these tunnels, they created this whole inner world inhabitants, and they only allow select members of the human race to come down there and operate. And so in doing my research, I would say that I land on the idea that yes, there's a massive conspiracy going on inside the earth, and I think it's also leading us up into the end times where we see biblical prophecy being fulfilled. The Septuagint translation in Isaiah talks about giants will come up to fulfill God's wrath. We've got some very interesting interpretations of different parts of Scripture that seem to make sense once we grasp the idea of the hollow earth. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the government's already, we know there's deep underground military bases all over the place, but Antarctica is one of those places that the average American could not trespass on and locate what they're doing. But just to touch on what you mentioned about the opening, I think there was like 6 to 8 British intelligence members that were down there, and they had set up some soldiers to kind of stay guard on a certain area. And I don't know these people. I'm just going to pass this information on. People can take it or leave it. But the story goes something like this. They were told not to cross a certain border, that they had to stay in a certain location. Well, they got into a plane and they exceeded the boundaries that were set for them, and that's where they found the second opening that before that nobody had ever talked about a second opening. Before that it was just a matter of the pole. There was an opening at the pole, but now these men, they flew over the second opening and they said that they saw entities and they saw other strange things taking place over there that they could not explain, things that absolutely defied human logic. And when they got back to where they were supposed to be, they were heavily reprimanded and sent home. Now, I don't know if they ever made it home. I don't know how it works over there. I don't know what type of secrecy, what they're willing to do to keep those secrets, but they were heavily reprimanded. That's the story that I got. And all they did was fly over a certain place they were not supposed to fly over, and they got in trouble.
Yeah, what do you think is because you mentioned the British intelligence, which you go down that rabbit trail, it all kind of connects in the same web as well. You got the Freemasons, which connects to the Zionist regime, which connects to the Jesuit order, which trickles back to the Vatican. What's the biggest institution doing the covering up, in your opinion?
It's hard to say because it's so compartmentalized. I believe that Lucifer is the head of the Illuminati. I believe that the Rothschild family, getting into that area of research, you find out that the Rothschild family has for many years held the title of the Pindar of the Draco, or the penis of the dragon. And I know it sounds vulgar, but that's what they call the head of the Illuminati, is the penis of the dragon. Well, we know that the dragon is Satan. And so they've got it set up in a way where the head, or the Pindar, communicates directly with Lucifer. And this makes sense. It really does make sense when we start to think about it. And so he's getting his orders, he's getting his information directly from Lucifer. We know that Lucifer is not omnipresent. We know he can only be at one place at one time. He's not God. And so with this being the situation, he deals with one person, the Pindar. The Pindar, it all trickles down, and it's all compartmentalized like what we call pyramid schemes, no pun intended.
Right.
And so in dealing like that, we understand that Lucifer is at the end of the day, he is the one in charge of all the conspiracy. I mean, literally, the conspiracy against God and God's people and God's word, it all comes down from Satan himself. So, I mean, whether you want to call it the Illuminati, whether you want to get into the idea of the Jesuits, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, it's all part of this big compartmentalized system. But again, I go back to what Paul said, and I know your question was more so speaking of fleshly terms, but Paul makes it very clear that we wrestle with principalities. And so when I look at these things, rather than deciding this man or that man, I say, well, it's Satan. Satan physically is doing these spiritual things. He's physically manifesting and dealing with certain people that are high up in this game, this cosmic chess match, and then they're taking his orders and they're running with it. So is it possible that Satan is set up inside the earth? Absolutely. Why wouldn't he be? We know in the book of Job, he says he's going back and forth, to and fro, up and down in the earth. And furthermore, Gons, think about it like this. There is dark satanic activity. There is an operation of evil taking place in the earth. And it's so important to Satan that he goes back and forth down to it just to keep a check on it. It requires his attention, as we break down in the film. So something down there is that important that Satan is going back down there regularly to keep a check, to make sure that things are going as planned. So that tells...
It's almost like a...
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, it's almost like the... it reminds me of the Lord of the Rings, you know, when the orcs are down there, hammering away, creating their weapons.
It is. It's much like that. I mean, really, movies give us a little glimpse into these things. And a lot of... Did you ever see the Supergirl movie?
Maybe. I don't know.
Well,
not ringing a bell off the top of my head.
It's a newer movie. I think it was Supergirl. And at the end of the movie, there's this little statement that gets made. She's trying to kill one of the gods of old. I think it's the god of war. I forget his name. But he makes a statement that, where do you think all these things come from?
Are you talking about Wonder Woman?
Wow, Wonder Woman. Thank you, man. I'm like losing my mind over here, dude.
Supergirl. I'm like,
Yeah, I don't watch Supergirl. Sorry about that.
Yeah, yes, I did see Wonder Woman, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I have notes from all these movies that I never actually made videos on. That movie was filled with all kinds of like little nuggets of, what's really going on or whatever. So yeah,
what did he say? What did he say to her? He says, "Where do you think all these things come from? Where do you think all these inventions?" You know, and I'm paraphrasing here.
He says, it's like him saying he's whispering. He's got, he basically influences the people, and then the people carry it out.
Exactly.
That was kind of the idea. Yeah.
And when I heard that, I'm like, man, that's like the nugget of truth for this movie. I mean, granted, there's a lot of little tidbits in the movie, but that was it, because we have all this technology, we have all these crazy things that mankind is grabbing, we're
You see that new movie, Wonder Girl? She looked down at the ground.
Oh, come on.
What's in your wallet?
Oh, cookie! There's nothing like it in the world. May I have salt? What do you say? Now.
Mama's spécialité de la maison.
Oh, fish.
Start with the eyes. Did you sleep well?
Like a dead. Really?
Who would have thought the Bermuda Triangle could change a man so much? He used to toss and turn all night. We had to change him to the bedpost.
Doesn't make sense.
The Bermuda Triangle is a very strange place. You'd be surprised at all the things you don't know.
She certainly would. Wednesday's doors to the Bermuda Triangle. She studies it. That's it. She's hooked.
Being in my own room sure brings back memories. Remember Camp Custer for pre-teen offenders. Oh! Aren't memories precious? Today I like to wander into the house.
No, sorry, old man. No wandering today. Today we're going straight to the vault. Bravo, Pugsley!
Oh, man.
My name is Brian Stevenson. Our organization will cover all legal fees. Clearly, this trial was constructed with lies.
I was sold on y'all won't pay a penny. You know a lot more with this community than you think.
Just mercy. Pretty people.